Chelsea, welcome to the Light Path podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I am pumped for this conversation because I think resilience is not a very talked about adult quality or skill, but
Yeah.
one in which, my Lord, we need. And I think as time goes on, the more technology evolves, the way the world
Mhm.
changes, we just need a tool bag of resilience techniques and strategies to cope with so much uncertainty and change and all the things that life throws at us.
Absolutely. Hmm.
So, Chelsea, you are a neurosomatic intelligence coach. I
Hmm.
cannot wait to dive in to unpack what that means. But first of all, would love to hear your story and how you came into this work of really helping people, with their nervous system, with talk therapy, and with really understanding the ways in which they can tackle life more productively and effectively.
Yeah. Um, well, really, it started for me. I don't know if this is true for every coach, but I feel like every coach starts with their own personal story, right?
Yeah.
They realize, okay, there's a lot of work for me to do. And once we get to that, like, oh, I've worked through it, or, I kind of made it over that hill. Now I'm going to look back and I realize there's so many people that I can help back there. So that's really where it started for me. I help people with complex trauma. And it's because I really disagreed with talk therapy that I started being a coach, that I really wanted to bring something to the world that wasn't really there. But started with a lot of complex experiences growing up in my home, dysfunctional family systems, absent parents, watching alcohol abuse. There were so many different layers that led me to what I now understand as trauma, but at the time I had no idea was trauma. And it actually started out with poetry. I started to transform what was painful into poetry, and I've self-published 2 poetry collections. But through that alchemy, taking what was painful and then turning it into something that was empowering and beautiful and um, could really convey the emotion coming from one side to the other, I realized I have to help people. Um, and I remember the day that it really hit me that I had to help people, like that was my gift. I was working as a receptionist, so I was answering the phones, sitting at this desk, and I remember looking out the window and life was just passing me by. I'm watching people do their thing, move through life, and I had my book actually sitting on my desk. And I looked down and I was like, there's something so much bigger for me than sitting here answering a phone, taking everybody's messages, making sure this gets there. And so I came home that evening and I said to my now fiance, um, I said, I have to quit my job. And I know that sounds crazy, but I know I'm meant for something bigger. And he just trusted me, thankfully. And now we're here 4 years later. Just got my neurosomatic intelligence coaching certification, and it's been a really, really incredible journey.
I think people's stories are so empowering for other people to hear, but I want to go back to that moment where you're sitting there and you're like, oh, there's more than this. Because I think
Mhm.
that's where a lot of people get really stuck because they go straight into well, what is it? What is it? What is it? So,
Mhm.
can you talk us through that sticky moment and what you did to move through it?
Yeah. Well, I guess that was the moment that I decided to act on it. I knew
Got
that
it.
I was meant for something bigger at a much younger age. Given all the trauma that I had endured, I realized I was really different from my family. I realized I had a lot of
Mm.
different wants and desires. I didn't I didn't want to behave like them. I was kind of outcasted because of that. And so I always knew that there was something different. But that moment when I realized it, that voice was so loud that I couldn't ignore it anymore. That
How did you
voice
know what
was,
it was though? Like, how did you know it was to work with people, to help people? When did that drop in?
hmm, I think it was after. publishing the book and like actually holding that and being able to say to myself, like, this is my journey. This is like my heart. This is the transformation of all that was pain into power, into
Mm.
something that now fuels me or fulfills me or can serve somebody else in their journey. I think it was holding that book, having like a tangible, because there's not really a lot of tangibles in the healing or resilience journey, but being able to hold that book and realize, wow, that's where I came from, and this is the byproduct of it.
Yeah, I think
Wow.
that's really interesting. Like it, and we talk a lot about on the light path about how it all has to come from within. I think people look out to be like, oh, I want to be that, or I want to be respected that way, or I'd love to have autonomy in my life this way, even if it's just autonomy over the time that I work or where I work. And I think
Mhm.
that that totally misses the point. Like we look for the outside things to make us feel like we're on path, but really you've just got to go within. And what I'm hearing you say in your experience, and definitely was the same for me, just kind of surrendering to who you are, to your story, to your experiences, and having those things inform you and what lights you up and where you're going, and then transmuting that into something that is, well, what I would call energy exchange for in terms of pouring your heart and soul in it. And that becomes your work that people then pay to engage with you in.
Mhm. Absolutely. And that book, both of them were difficult to write because
Mm.
there was a lot of things that I had to be really good and honest with myself about that were
Mm.
true to my story that other people in my life didn't want to admit yet and didn't want to own. So I really had to detach from the tribe. You know, we're so
Mm.
concerned with belonging. Sometimes we're so concerned with being accepted and always having a place. But sometimes you have outgrown that and you stay too long in something that isn't going to serve you and isn't going to push you to expand the way that you need to. So I really had to decide for myself, is it worth compromising my authenticity, my voice for the comfort of others? Or is my story ready to be told? Is it ready to be in the hands of people who also need this information?
Yeah, it's a big one. I think that, in my experience, it was like the people that were really with you were with you anyway. And the people that weren't just really beautifully dropped off. It wasn't overly dramatic. It just kind of happens organically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like once you vote in that direction, and I call it vote, like if you energetically, maybe it's paying for a coach, maybe it's buying a certain book, maybe it's taking yourself out. But when you energetically vote in that direction, then your life just aligns that way. Certain people that weren't meant to be there, they fall out. Certain opportunities that were meant to get to you, they
Mm.
come to you. It's really magical the way that things just line up when you start to take action from the person you're supposed to be.
Oh, I love that. And of course, you and I have taken that action in a similar direction in that we hold and help and support others. But I mean, this direction could be, your passion for playing a piano. This direction could be your love of interiors, like you just love aesthetics. And that could light you up. And, next thing you know, in 4 years' time, you could be like the world's best cushion designer. But all those opportunities can't align with you unless you really surrender to that yourself. And probably, I imagine, work through all your creativity blocks or your business blocks or your imposter syndrome blocks, whatever it is, So this is not just for people like, you and I and the work we do. This is for everybody,
Wow.
everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everybody has a gift in them. And I think it takes a lot of courage to own it.
Mm.
And once you then follow it and you're like, okay, I want to make money, I want to prosper from this gift. That in itself is its own challenge and its own level of imposter syndrome. And am I qualified enough? Can I actually Yeah, I really do think that everybody has their own unique gift, but it takes a lot of courage to own it. And at some point, sometimes it becomes more than just owning it. Then it's like, okay, I want to prosper from this. How do I turn this into a business? How do I turn this into something that brings me money? And then there's all the other things that come up, like, am I qualified enough? Do I
Mm.
deserve to earn money just by doing something that I love? Is that early earning it? Am I working hard enough? There's so many layers to taking that gift and making it your life.
Yeah, for sure. That's why I think like everyone's got their own curriculum in life. So if you're just going to like tick off other people's boxes, or like you say, kind of conform to what your family had going on, even though if it didn't feel authentic to you, then you are going to miss out on everything you came here to be, to learn, to go through, to heal, you know?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I want to pick up on trauma. Trauma is not
Mm-hmm.
something that I've really spoken about a lot on this podcast, but I'd love to hear your take on trauma, your understanding of trauma, what it does to our psyche, to our physicality. I know it's a big
Mm-hmm.
question. That's its own podcast.
Right.
But anyway, if you could just give us the little 101 introduction course on trauma, that'd be awesome.
Um, well, so trauma in itself really, I think there's a lot of misconception around what it is. A lot of people think trauma is, well, my mom wasn't emotionally available, right? Or my dad didn't show up, or my parents got a divorce, or I got a divorce, or I lost somebody that I love. And trauma is really not the event itself. It's
Mm.
actually the impression, the emotional scarring of that event. So a lot of people are misunderstanding that you can be healed. It doesn't have to be about the context of the event. It's how you adapted after the event, right?
Mm.
And so that's why I love working with the nervous system, because we're reprogramming the exact system that got so disrupted during the trauma. Is your posture different? Do you breathe different? How is your heart rate elevated? What does your balance system look like now after all those things that have happened to you, even complex trauma or childhood trauma? It can alter all those different states in our body. And then on the other side of that, we have dis-ease, right? We have disorder, dysregulation. It's not that it's forever. And that's why I loved, and accepted being on your podcast, because I want to bring the resilience, the recovery, the hope that there really is in the trauma journey. Whereas I think a lot of people want to just talk about the trauma. They want to just continue to, let's stay in it, let's stay stuck in it, or you're stuck with this, label or disorder. I don't see it that way. I think trauma is something that, in very much in a resilient way, if we are able to grow through it, resilience is the byproduct.
Best definition of trauma I
Yeah.
have ever heard. So
Thank
well
you.
done. Now that question came out of left field for Chelsea, just so you know, I did not tell her I'd be asking her about that. But um, that is so beautiful. And what I find the most beautiful thing about that is how non-judgmental and disarming it is, because trauma doesn't have to be a big deal. And I think people compare trauma a lot, like, oh, I don't have the right to feel trauma over that. It wasn't a big deal. Like I just didn't get I had never had a bike when I was a kid, and but that could be traumatic for you, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not a comparison thing. And I feel like you've just given everyone permission to be like, oh yeah, there were moments in my life where I became dysregulated.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly it. And trauma is really the prolonged dysregulation, right? So we got into that dysregulation, and then we didn't have the proper support, environment, compassion, emotional, maturity or intelligence of somebody in our surrounding to help us learn how to turn it off. So it just stayed dysregulated ever since.
Yeah. So talk to us about the other side then, because I think that we could probably talk forever, as you say, about, what trauma does to the body and how it sits in the body and the mind. But I think you've just said it there, like it just gets dysregulated. So in terms of coming back to regulation, one, how do you know how to do that when you don't know what regulated is or feels like.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
two, how does that process lead to resilience?
Okay. Yeah. So the interesting thing about trauma, most of us were hurt in relationship,
Mm,
right? Whether that was mom and dad, whether that was our siblings, maybe it was an ex-partner, we were hurt in relationships in some way. And the key ingredient to healing trauma is co-regulation. If we never learned how to self-regulate, um, I'm sorry, rather, if we never learned how to co-regulate, leaning into somebody else's safety in their nervous system, right? Just like mom soothing a baby, right? We are borrowing her regulation. We're borrowing her softness, her presence, her attunement to us. If we never develop that relationship, it's going to be very difficult to regulate ourselves. So that's really where most of the healing comes through. I'm not a big fan of talk therapy.
mm.
If we talk about it and talk about it, the body gets activated and we never get to move through it, right?
And
But
even like not even talk therapy, but like even like girls' drinks. Like, how
mm,
often do you sit with your girlfriends at dinner or drinks and talk about all the crappy ex-boyfriends you've had, or that? And
mhm,
I'm like, I literally, I wish I was brave enough to just get up and walk away because I'm like, what is the point of this conversation? But I get the point of the conversation. Everyone's trying to work through their trauma.
right,
It's like not helpful.
right. Yeah, you're just staying on loop,
Yeah.
right? You're just repeating the exact same thing. And so for me, looking at talk therapy that way and seeing that it's just we're repeating the cycle, we're letting the body get really activated and work itself up. We're not moving through the trauma. Looking at it that way, I can see where the therapist, we're going out with the girls is a helpful dynamic because we're trying to borrow somebody else's regulation. If
Mm-hmm.
there's nobody's regulation to borrow, then we're just stirring all that stuff up and we're just staying on repeat. We're just looping through the same cycle. Um, so really that's the key ingredient is you need to borrow somebody's regulation first so that they can be a witness to all of your pain. They can sit with you and soothe you and help you move through it. And then when you have that skill, then you can self-regulate. Then you can start to generate that, oh, I feel safe on my own. I feel protected. I feel loved. I feel nurtured. And then you have that beautiful place where you can get to in relationships where it's reciprocal. You know, it's not so much me leaning into them. It's not so much them leaning into me. It's I can give that to myself as well. And these relationships just fulfill that even more. Right.
Can you get to self-regulation without co-regulation?
You have to have co-regulation to
Okay.
understand self. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
So really someone you've got to really seek that out is what I'm hearing from
Yeah.
whoever is the right source for being able to hold your space that way.
Right. For some people, it is talk therapy. For some people, it might be their barista at the coffee shop they love to
Mm,
go to. For some people,
mhm.
it's their girlfriend. But to get to those deeper levels of healing, absolutely, I would say somebody in the trauma space because they know how to hold all those depths. They know how to be present for all the anger, the confusion, the grief, all those different layers that can show up.
Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. So once you
Mhm.
move into self-regulation, where you're able to hold yourself, because I don't think trauma is something that we just, it happens and then we learn to hold it. I think trauma is always there for us, not from the past, but just day to day. I mean, our lives are pretty traumatic.
Mhm.
The world is set up
Absolutely.
beautifully for that at the moment.
Mhm.
So we're always going to be triggered into new trauma, old trauma, whatever it is. So once we can sit in that self-regulated place, let's talk then resilience because of this repeated showing up of trauma in our experience. How do you define resilience?
Ooh, that's a good question. Resilience to me is the ability to grow through the difficulty, to grow through the challenges, to grow through the adversity and the setbacks. Resilience is the byproduct of growing through the difficult thing. Right? And I think resilience only comes to us that way because we have to move through it, right? A lot of people I feel like are sitting in it. They don't want to suffer. They don't want to be anxious. They don't want to be depressed or stuck, but they're sitting in it. They just don't have a lot of options to move through it. But resilience is right there waiting for you when you feel through it, when you finally conquer that past that was keeping you chained to who you used to be and not who you desire to be.
How do you separate resilience from those layers of armor that we can put on, such as, you know, emotional like denial or, you know, complete opposite of what we went through. So you just kind of block that out. How do you separate the two? Because I think that's the coping strategy that a lot of people come up with. And I'm just thinking back to when I talk about resilience with little people. Well, I used to talk about resilience with little people. It was a big skill that we used to teach a lot to little ones. And a lot of it's about like just getting on with it. Like, yeah, that wasn't fair, but you just have to get on with it. Yep, someone called you a bad name, but you have to decide that's not for you and you're not going to believe that and just get on with it. And I think that we've missed a important piece there. And I don't know what that piece is because I think there's a
Yeah.
difference between the two.
Absolutely. So for me, that's where the trauma or the nervous system work makes the most sense. That fills that gap for me because I absolutely understand what you're saying. So when we talk about the nervous system, that's unique to every single person. And if we say, okay, how does that feel in your body first? What does that make you want to do? How did that change the way that your body is or the way that you move your behavior? If we look at it like that first and address that level, okay, this is the impression that your nervous system got from that person saying something mean to you, right? Something
Yeah,
mean
let's
that
do it like we are speaking to an 8-year-old and then we can apply it to our own adult lives. So like I come to you, I'm like, that person just called me a loser.
yeah,
And so the response to that would be,
I would say what's going on in your body.
yeah, so I feel angry, I'm annoyed, I'm mad.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. When you're feeling angry, when you're feeling mad, what do you notice starts to happen? What changes?
I get really tight.
Hmm.
I hope an 8-year-old would say that. I can imagine an 8-year-old going,
Yeah,
like they would show me rather than tell me, but they would feel tight.
exactly. So at that point, I would say, what does your body want to do right now?
Oh, probably lash out.
Hmm. Yeah. And I would say, okay, let's do this in a healthy way.
Mm.
Let me give you a pillow. Let's take you outside. Let's stomp in the grass. Let's get that energy out of your system, right? Because the trauma happens when we just hold it. Because we're told,
Mm.
get on with it,
Yeah.
move on. So if we get that energy out, then we can move through that cycle, right? It no longer becomes a stress loop or a survival loop in our system. How does it want to be exercised and being able to listen to how it wants to be exercised?
Yeah, love that. And so when, as an adult, it might be like, let's go back to the imposter syndrome
Yeah.
example from the beginning. So, there is no way I could become a cushion designer. I'm not creative enough, or someone wants to buy my cushion. This feels really awkward to exchange money for it. It's definitely something I felt when I first started my career, this career. I feel really awkward exchanging money for this. Like, what if it's not good enough? Like, what if they don't get anything out of it?
Mhm.
And I guess in my body, I would just feel like this deep fear of judgment.
Yes. Yeah. So for me, the way that I would approach that is, where did you first feel that? Where did
Mm.
you first feel judged? And can we trace that back to a memory? Can we trace it back to a certain age?
Yeah,
Yeah.
nice. And then when you do that, is this like the process that builds that resilience because of all the trauma that's going to get triggered and going to come up?
Yeah. And so we don't always have to work from a memory. Sometimes it can be just a sensation, right? So maybe when we think about selling, our cushions or exchanging them for money, the same thing. What would happen in your body, right? And say it was that tightness, say your body braced. Obviously, there's a fear response happening there. So in the past, when you felt judged, maybe your best option was to freeze. It was to just say, okay, I'm not going to let myself be seen. I'm going to make myself small. I'm going to be convenient. I'll just be invisible, right? So maybe that's what it was. So what we would want to do is tap back into that same energy and start to move through it, right? So like we're going back in time to that sensation or to that age, and then we want to give it a new nervous system to re-experience the past. That's how we create resilience. If we go back to it and we finally move through it, we like press play again, then we have resilience because we went back to the thing and we've conquered it.
Yeah, nice. Do you find that you have to repeat that cycle? I mean, because if it was a one-hit wonder, that'd be amazing.
Right.
But I imagine like resilience. I see resilience as like something you practice. Like it's a
Absolutely.
verb.
Yes. Absolutely. And I love that you said it that way because it absolutely is like it's not that we're going to go back to that one thing that happened and we're going to overcome it and then everything's just going to be perfect again. We're going to have to continually climb those mountains and we're going to get better and better the more that we go. But we just have to get that first one. And then we're like, well, this one, it's probably going to challenge me, but I think I could do it. And then you go to the next one. You're like, yeah, that one looks a little bit more intimidating, but I still think I can do it because you have all that past evidence there of all those mountains you've climbed. And you're like, okay, I can do it. It might challenge me, but I feel more available or I feel more accepting that it will challenge me.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think that sometimes when we go into those really tricky emotions, like those adult emotions of like abandonment or loneliness, rejection, judgment,
Ah,
those big ones,
mhm.
I guarantee most of us they get on with it or ignore it or mask it. Mask it. I mean, we're all
Yeah,
the biggest maskers, right?
right. Hmm.
And so imagine like the empowerment that would come if what I'm hearing from you, if we can sit with it, that's resilience.
Oh,
Gotcha. I've gotcha. I've gotcha. Don't worry. We'll just cut that bit out. um,
so you said that's resilience.
yeah. I said, so if we can sit with it, that's
Mhm.
resilience.
Yes, because what we are then doing is we're creating little by little, challenge overcome. We're creating a bigger container to experience the challenges, the stress, the setbacks that are going to come our way. That's how I like to look at it, is like right now everybody's container for stress, for discomfort, for challenge, for adversity is so small. And that's
Mm.
why we're all so stressed, so anxious, so panicked, so worried. So if we can expand that container, if we can get better at actually holding the stress rather than trying to eliminate it or manage it, if we can just get better at holding it, we're unstoppable at that point. Everything is coming in and then we're transmuting it out, right? If we're a big container for it, it's not getting held up in our energy, in our bodies, and in our relationships. It's moving through us.
Yeah. Love that. I think there's nothing better than feeling like you've got you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. And I would say that that's really what's on the other side of the trauma healing journey, right? At first, you need somebody to kind of mirror that with and co-regulate with. And then when you graduate to that self-regulation, you're like, I've got me. It's beautiful that these people can be in my life and support me and I can lean on them, but I've got me. Mhm.
And I think when we've got ourselves, we become so much more discerning, but also
Mhm.
so much more open to the choices that we make in our lives because we don't need a particular person. We don't need a particular position. We don't need a particular income bracket or car or whatever. We can want it, but we don't need it. And from personal experience, there is nothing more nourishing and juicy and delicious than that.
Yes. Yeah. There's a sort of like magnetism that comes from that. And then all those things that you want, they're just being magnetized towards you.
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the funny thing. Like we are always, biting off our own nose to spite our face because we're always trying to protect, to mask, to ignore. And it, like you say, I love that. It just keeps this container for our capacity to hold life so small. But if you just kind of looked at it and went, oh, yeah, I feel that way, and regulate through it, then we become so much more resilient for the bigger, bigger, bigger things that will
Yeah.
always come. That will always, crash on in as a big wave over us when we least expect it. But I love it. Do you get to that point now where you're like, oh, here's a massive disappointment, here's a massive setback here, and then you're like, okay? Or do you still get, oh, completely dumped and drowned by that wave?
There are some times, right? Like there are some times where it's like something just blindsides me. But, it might be, whereas like in the past, it was a couple of weeks, it was a couple of months, it was a couple of years that I would live like that, feeling like I was so off track or so derailed. And now it's like a couple of days and I go, okay, I'm gonna let myself feel it. I'm gonna let myself be here. I'm gonna accept it. There's no good in me trying to push it away and resist it. I'll let it be here. And then I'm like, okay, I got this. I can move through it. And even when I get to those depths, there's still a little part of me that knows it's possible. You're gonna get through this. There's always that like unwavering knowing that I'll get there.
I love that. I feel exactly the same way. I love that. And I think people get so overwhelmed, like, because you can sit in the same trauma for
Yeah.
years. But that's so true. Now, when stuff comes up, I'm just like so excited because here it is. I'm going to feel the feels, but I know on the other side of that are the gifts of resilience. So, what would you say are the gifts that you get from the resilience that you've cultivated?
Wow. Authenticity being the biggest one of them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like there's there's so much more room to be me. And I remember a point in my life where I felt so paralyzed to be myself. I remember this one moment so vividly. It was just about telling this other woman that I loved her dress and I thought it looked really nice on her. And I was so paralyzed with fear of what if she thinks this? What if she says this? What if she doesn't agree with me? Or what if she's like rude? All the things, all the fear stuff that comes up. And so I didn't do it. And it just like haunted me. It just like I would ruminate on that. And I was like, why couldn't I just tell that woman that I thought her dress was beautiful? Um, and so going from that version of myself to now where, I talk in front of an audience of 47,000 people about I don't like talk therapy or I disagree with disorders, being able to have that freedom to be so expressive and not worry about the backlash or how people may not like me or might disagree with what I say. I have to say that's probably the biggest gift on the other side.
I
Mhm.
mean, authentic self is what we are all about here. And I think that you hit the nail on the head. Are there other gifts? Sure, but nothing compared to that. That feeling of being free to be you and
Mhm.
choosing your authenticity. And isn't it funny how, like, could you imagine if, years ago I'd said to you, do you know what? You're only going to be able to grow an audience if you totally say the thing that that everyone will disagree with you on, that that talk therapy isn't a thing.
Gosh, yeah. I would have, yeah, I wouldn't have believed it.
Mm.
And funny, like how we're talking about magnetizing certain experiences. Um, my account went viral back in December. And I was just this little account of like 3,500 people. And I was like, this is comfortable. Nobody, everyone here is like a match for what I'm saying. And then this reel went viral and reached 3.5 million people. And I was like, I'm going to quit. I can't do this. Oh my God, I'm terrified. I'm never going to post again. And I had to let myself, that was one of the things that really blindsided me. And I had to let myself just be in it. I work with a coach and I told her about it. And she's like, okay, Chelsea, quit. Let yourself think that you quit. Go through it. Tell me exactly what's going to happen. And, then coming out on the other side of that, reading all these hate comments, all these like, who are you to say this? And how are you qualified for this? Coming out on the other side of that, I was like, it's so important. It's more than important for me to share the things that people aren't willing to say, that people aren't willing to talk about, that they're afraid to openly admit about, talk therapy or disorders or medications. That's then what magnetized the people that are now in my audience, which are a perfect fit for me, which absolutely resonate with everything that I say. And if I didn't have that, if I had never had that moment of like, oh my God, I'm going to quit, am I qualified? I would have never really found that courage to keep going and to keep saying bigger statements and to keep digging deeper into what lights me up and what I feel that I'm meant to share.
That is one of my favorite techniques, when people come with like their biggest fears. And usually the biggest fears are like, what happens if I leave the marriage, or what happens if I never meet someone? That just might be my current audience at the moment, or clientele at the moment. And I love just saying, so yeah, what would happen? Like, what would happen if you were single for the rest of your life?
Right.
Like, it's not that bad. Chill the fuck out. Chill out. Sit in that. See that you have so much joy and lusciousness and happiness in that. And boom, that opens up the option to actually, again, be discerning about a partner that would suit you. You're not choosing out of that desperation. So for you to sit in like, okay, that's it. I cannot be this seen. I cannot be this hated. I cannot be this challenged. To sit in and go, okay, what would happen? Well, like I'd be fine, but I'd be really limited.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I think that's so important to let people go there, because then they realize how much more resourceful they are.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I want to pick up on the hate comment, because I think that this is interesting, because I think that stops a lot of people from really stepping into their full expression, full authenticity in terms of what they do. So if I'm here making cushions, I don't know why cushions is the example today. I think on my peripheral vision, my cushions on my couch that are not set up beautifully, and I like things to be like set up beautifully, but whoever was on the couch last night did not put them back nicely before getting up this morning. But like, the couch person, well, I'd have to be online. I'd have to put it out there. And this is something I went through. Oh my gosh, the negotiations I had with business managers and PR about, no, I really don't have to put my face out there. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. My name, why don't we just put another? No, your name. Last name, no last name. Yep, you're like really standing up and being seen. Talk to us how you did, in that, because I would imagine it's quite traumatic to have strangers on the internet completely going you. Talk us through it. What did you do? How did you get through that?
Yeah. Well, I tried to stay away from the comments, tried to not read them.
That never works.
Right. Some of them just pop through, and then you happen to read the ones that feel the most hurtful. But after reading them, and also having big cries, sitting down with my fiance and being like, how can I continue doing this if people are going to think this about me, or if they're going to say this about me? Really what it came down to, and when I brought it to that coach and she said, well, what would happen? What would happen? What it came down to was actually a memory that I had when I was in first grade, maybe even younger, about being seen in a negative way. And I remember this teacher being so rude to me at our family, our conferences, and, had really called me out in a nasty way. And all that was coming through in the present moment was that scared 8-year-old girl. Was that scared 8-year-old girl that didn't feel like anybody advocated for her, that felt like everyone was not on her side. And so when I sat with that part of me, and when I could be the one to comfort her, that's when I overcame that. And I was like, it doesn't matter what all these other people say. If I've got my back, they could say anything and it doesn't matter. I can scroll right past it. I can delete it. They can have their opinions. It really did roll off of my back like that. But when I was in it, when I felt like that little 8-year-old girl that didn't have anybody on her team, of course that felt devastating. But when I could be the one to go back and give her that love, like my coach, she had walked me through this visualization of, okay, that teacher gets fired
Mm.
and you get to be the one to tell her to pack her stuff and get out. And then this loving, teacher, your favorite teacher, they get to come into this and then they get to be the one that supports you through this and helps you move through that. Having that visualization and feeling the emotional impression shift away from being seen as a bad thing to, oh wow, now I have these supportive figures that are on my team. That's really what shifted it. It was just that 8-year-old girl that came up in the present moment.
Yeah, and that's why inner child work is just so dynamic and powerful. And I love that, you get to that point where the result of that is
Mhm.
alignment with the people that do resonate with what you're saying. Is everyone going to? No, of course not. But that
Yeah.
doesn't matter. You're just not for them. Go to someone else's page. No big deal. And
Mhm.
if you're ever a person tempted to share your opinion with someone on their social media that you don't agree with them, just know that that is such a waste of your thumb muscle and your emotions, because here's the quicker way. Just swipe up, go to the next reel, you don't have to absorb things that don't necessarily resonate with you. You don't have to make them right. Your need to make them right or to put your point across has nothing to do with that person.
Exactly.
Scroll
Exactly. It's
on.
a mirror for that
Yeah.
person to look. Why do I need to go after this person? Why do I need to leave that comment? Why do I need to disagree so heavily? Let's just take a moment and look at what that's reflecting for you. Was there
Yeah.
something you didn't feel heard around? Was there something that, you know, you couldn't advocate for? Like, look inward, just like how we started the conversation. It's all within you.
It is. And I think through this definition of trauma, through this window into what holding yourself through the difficult, tricky, sticky, challenging emotions can give us, is that resilience of not avoiding them, but being able to hold them. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is the different narrative around healing. We're not here to be at ease, we're here to be breezing through the moments that make us feel uncomfortable. And that is true resilience. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on that, but also being brave enough to step into your authenticity. Because, like you say, it's still a choice. You can do all this work and you could have kept
Mm-hmm.
that to yourself. But the
Yeah.
fact that you didn't, and as a result of that, you're still challenged, and there's more layers to it, which is why I get excited when there's another layer. It's like, oh, yep, great. The 8-year-old girl, you needed to put that reel out there so it went viral, so that 8-year-old girl could just get a little hug and then we can all move on, So thank you so much for sharing with us. Where can we find you? Where can we connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mostly show up on Instagram. I have all the others, but I'm really on Instagram every day. And you can find me on Spotify and Apple. I have a podcast of my own called Start Thriving. That's a podcast on healing complex trauma. And beyond that, I mean, I do have a couple of courses, some self-paced, a group program, and even one-on-one.
I will link all of those in the show notes
Mhm.
below. So head down there, click through. But really, Chelsea, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your story with us today. And I hope that we've inspired someone out there just to consider the impact that cultivating resilience can really have on their life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for letting me be here. I've loved it.